When I first bought property on the lake, I thought I had found heaven on earth. Mornings started with the water still and glassy, broken only by the dip of an oar or the leap of a fish. The air was crisp, the kind of clean you only get when pine trees surround the shoreline. Owning a slice of this place wasn't just about property, it was about peace. Neighbors would wave as they set off in fishing boats, kids rode bikes along the gravel lanes, and families gathered around fire pits in the evenings. It was the sort of community that felt safe, tucked away from the noise and rush of the world. But every paradise has a gatekeeper. Ours went by the name Karen. She wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the board. Or at least she acted like it. Short blonde haircut, sharp voice, and an iron grip on every meeting. She had rules for everything: how tall your grass could be, what paint you could use on your dock, what time your porch lights should turn off. If she could, she would have told us how many marshmallows we were allowed to roast at a bonfire. At first, most people just nodded along. Some even supported her, thinking her obsession with rules kept the place classy. But others, myself included, could see the line between order and control blurring fast. The showdown started small. Karen came knocking one afternoon with a clipboard in hand and a fake smile plastered across her face. "You'll need to repaint your dock," she said. "Why's that?" I asked, looking out at the weathered wood. "The HOA guidelines specify neutral colors. Yours is too rustic." Too rustic. That was her way of saying it didn't look like the glossy catalog picture she wanted every property to resemble. I told her politely I wasn't changing a thing. My dock was sturdy, safe, and I'd built it myself. That was the end of it, at least I thought so. The letters started arriving a week later. Thin envelopes slipped into my mailbox with the HOA's letterhead and her signature at the bottom. Violation notice. Unauthorized dock color. Then came violation notice. Excessive boat size, because I happened to own a fishing boat longer than the arbitrary HOA maximum. Next was unauthorized structure, for the small shed I used to store life jackets and tackle. Every letter came with a fine attached. Every fine came with a threat of escalation. I ignored them. At the next HOA meeting, Karen singled me out. Her voice carried across the room, sharp and theatrical, like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "Some homeowners think they're above the rules," she said, glaring in my direction. "That kind of behavior threatens the harmony of this community." I told her the only thing threatening harmony was her power trip. The room went quiet. Half the board looked embarrassed, the other half looked scared. Karen's smile twitched, but her eyes burned. After that night, things changed. I noticed cars idling near my property longer than they should. Neighbors whispered that Karen had been telling people I was non-compliant and belligerent. At one point, someone even left a flyer taped to my door: HOA fines unpaid. Action will be taken. It felt less like community management and more like organized harassment. But the breaking point came when she demanded I pay for a so-called lakefront improvement fee. Thousands of dollars she claimed would go toward new landscaping around the shared docks. When I asked for receipts, budgets, or even proof of a vote approving the fee, she refused. "Either you pay," she hissed, "or consequences will follow." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Do your worst." And she did. Karen wasn't used to people saying no. So she found another way, something beyond fines, beyond letters, beyond HOA meetings. She decided to bring the fight straight to my doorstep. And she wouldn't come alone. It was a Saturday evening when they showed up. The lake was quiet, the sun dipping low, painting the water in streaks of orange and violet. I was on the back deck, coiling rope after pulling my boat in, when I heard engines rumbling down the gravel road. Not one engine. Several. 3 black SUVs crawled past the tree line and stopped right at the end of my driveway. The doors opened in unison, and 6 men stepped out. At first glance, they looked official. Black tactical pants, dark shirts with patches on the sleeves, utility belts loaded with gear. But the longer I looked, the more the details screamed wrong. The badges clipped to their belts were shiny but generic. No county sheriff markings. No state police insignia. Their vests had the word enforcement stenciled in bold white letters, nothing else. They weren't law enforcement. They were playing dress-up. The tallest one, bald with mirrored sunglasses, strode forward like he owned the ground. "Evening, sir," he called. "We're with the Lake Authority Enforcement Division. We need to conduct an inspection of your property." The Lake Authority Enforcement Division? I'd never heard of it, and I'd sat through enough HOA meetings to know every made-up committee Karen dreamed up. This was her handiwork, no doubt. I kept my tone flat. "You're on private property. State your authority." The bald one smirked. "Authority comes from the HOA. You've refused compliance. We're here to enforce the rules." Behind him, two of his men fanned out toward the dock. Another drifted toward the shed. They moved with swagger but not precision, like men who'd watched too many cop shows and thought they knew the part. I stepped down from the deck, keeping my hands visible but my stance firm. My instincts were screaming. These guys were amateurs. Dangerous in numbers, maybe, but not trained. Their spacing was sloppy, their gear mismatched, and not a single one had a radio. "You got a warrant?" I asked. The leader's smirk hardened. "We don't need a warrant. You're under HOA jurisdiction." That was all I needed to hear. I shook my head slowly, never breaking eye contact. "There's no such thing as HOA jurisdiction. You're trespassing. You're impersonating officers. And unless you turn around right now, the only enforcement you're going to deal with is the sheriff's department." One of them barked a laugh, but it was thin, nervous. Another shifted uneasily, glancing toward their SUVs. The leader tried to puff up bigger, like a rooster protecting hens. "Sir, non-compliance will result in fines, penalties, and removal of property. We can detain you if necessary." That was the moment the air snapped tight. Detain me. I'd been through enough raids overseas to know when a situation was about to go sideways. 6 imposters, full of false authority, already encroaching on my land. They weren't bluffing anymore. They were pushing. My voice dropped to steel. "Step foot on that dock, and you'll regret it." For a second, no one moved. Then one of the men actually placed his boot on the first plank of my dock. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end with words. The fake cops had crossed the line, and it was time to remind them that intimidation only works if the other man is afraid. The man's boot creaked against my dock, and that sound was the trigger. My training snapped into place like a switch flipping on. "Stop! Right there!" My voice cut through the air, sharp enough to freeze him mid-step. His buddies stiffened, hands hovering near their belts. I scanned them fast. No firearms visible, but a couple carried batons and one had a holstered pistol that looked more like an airsoft knockoff than a real sidearm. Still, any weapon in shaky hands is dangerous. I kept my body squared, calm, projecting control. Inside, I was already running scenarios. Distance to cover, number of hostiles, response time for county deputies if I dialed 911. The bald leader sneered. "You don't want to do this. Comply, and it goes easy." I pulled my phone from my pocket and raised it high, thumb already tapping. "Sheriff's Department," I said loud enough for all of them to hear. "I'm reporting armed impersonators trespassing on private property." The moment I spoke the words, tension exploded. "Hey, put that phone down," one of them shouted, taking 2 fast steps toward me. "Big mistake." I didn't flinch. "You touch me, and you'll be in cuffs before the night's over." The line connected, and I gave the dispatcher the short version. 6 men in tactical gear, claiming to be law enforcement, threatening detention. As soon as I said, impersonating officers, her tone went crisp. Units were already en route. The leader barked at his men, trying to salvage control. Hold position. Nobody moves until I say. But cracks were showing. One of the younger guys looked pale, sweat running down his temple. He wasn't built for this. He knew they'd gone too far. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, down the road, headlights, flashing blues. The real sheriff's department was arriving. That should have been the end of it. But these clowns doubled down. Don't back off, the bald one snarled at his crew. They're bluffing. Bluffing? Sirens were echoing through the trees. Not exactly subtle. Deputy cruisers screeched to a stop at the road's edge. Doors flew open, and real officers spilled out, weapons drawn, voices booming commands. Hands up! Drop any weapons! Step away from the property! Now the imposters froze for real. Their leader tried one last act of bravado, raising his hands but yelling, "We're authorized. HOA Enforcement Division. We're in the right here." The deputies weren't buying it for a second. They had their rifles leveled and their stances set. Then the situation tilted again. One of the imposters twitched, reaching toward his belt. That was it. Within seconds, the sheriff called in backup. And not just backup, tactical. I knew that sound before I saw them. The low rumble of armored engines, the synchronized boots hitting gravel. The SWAT team rolled in, kit and ready for a high-risk takedown. Spotlights blasted the driveway. Orders barked over loudspeakers. The imposters who had strutted onto my land like kings were now nothing but shaking silhouettes in the glare. Face down. Arms out. Do it now. And just like that, the so-called Lake Authority Enforcement Division was in the dirt, wrists zip-tied, their fake badges scattered like cheap toys. I exhaled for the first time in 20 minutes, my muscles finally unclenching. My dock was safe. My home was safe. But the story wasn't over. Because the SWAT commander, helmet under his arm, walked up to me and asked the million-dollar question. Who sent them? I didn't even have to answer. We both knew the name. Karen. The dust hadn't even settled when the truth started spilling out. The deputies processed the 6 imposters one by one, stripping off their knockoff gear, bagging fake IDs, and hauling them toward waiting cruisers. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, the adrenaline still running hot in my veins. The bald leader tried to argue even as he was pushed into the back seat. We had authorization. The HOA gave us jurisdiction. His voice cracked halfway through, desperation bleeding through the bluster. Nobody listened. The real cops had heard enough. By the time the SWAT commander circled back to me, the picture was already forming. These men weren't law enforcement. They weren't even licensed security. They were hired muscle contractors pulled in by none other than our HOA president herself. Karen. Her fingerprints were all over it. She'd been the one pushing the ridiculous new lake maintenance fees. She'd been the one demanding we repaint docks and pay for inspection visits. And when I refused, when I stood my ground, she tried to flex her power by sending in a squad of cosplaying enforcers. The deputies didn't waste time. That very night, they paid her a visit. Neighbors later told me the scene was something straight out of a movie. Sheriff's cruisers rolled up to her lakeside mansion. Karen came storming out in her robe, waving papers, shrieking about authority and my board rights. But the moment the word impersonation was mentioned, her face went pale. By morning, she was sitting in county lockup facing charges that included conspiracy, impersonation of law enforcement, and attempted unlawful detention. The story hit the local news, and within days, Lake Karen was the talk of half the state. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves, but the damage was done. Half the members resigned outright, the other half begged for forgiveness. Community meetings turned into shouting matches, and within a month, The entire HOA structure had collapsed under lawsuits and investigations. As for me, my dock stayed right where it was. My boat stayed in the water. And my neighbors, many of whom had quietly suffered under Karen's iron grip for years, finally breathed free. The lake returned to peace. I'd like to say that was the end of it, but the lesson stuck with me. All it took was one power-hungry neighbor, a title on a clipboard, and a pack of hired goons in tactical pants to turn a quiet lakeside community into a war zone. That night taught me two things. Authority only matters if it's legitimate. You don't bow down to fake badges and made-up rules. Bullies crumble when you refuse to fear them. Karen thought intimidation was power. In the end, it was her downfall. And when the last of the imposters was carted away, I stood at the edge of my dock, looking out at the lake. The water rippled calm under the moonlight, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Karen's empire had sunk, and the lake was finally ours again.